That's something that I've always felt is not a good practice, even though there probably is just as many good reasons to plant a tree there, but just two different watering needs. And I think at the end of the day, your trees, you're going to overwater, and that's not sustainable. Plants that attract snails. You know, I think that those are plants that we need to be careful of. Do I have any examples? You know, I bet Raj has some examples, but the fact is now you've got to buy snail bait. And, you know, plants, another one is a contractor, plants that are planted too close to irrigation heads. And, you know, it still happens to this day, and it's hard because I know that the owners want to see plants, the designers, you know, want to see the planters look full, and God knows our employees just seem to think that you have to plant that thing 1 foot from the sprinkler head, and it's tough to change.
I think staying away from invasive species, like you were saying, some of the grasses that are out there from American contractors telling the designers that, you know, these certain plants are aggressive before they get on an invasive species list, then you might want to listen to it because they will end up there eventually. And most of the plants that are on the invasive species list were designer plants at one point in time. So we do kind of need to take a look at, you know, what we're putting on the plans. And you know, the other thing too is just the wrong plant for the wrong space. So if it's a courtyard and you're not getting any air circulation, and you know there's certain plants that are prone to certain diseases or pathogens or whatever, we might need to stay away from those. Or trees that get too large for certain parkways, they shouldn't be in there. Once again, sometimes they do get there out of anyone's from this table's decision, but they do, and there's finger pointing. So. But either way, the last thing too is just the proper irrigation too. The zoning correctly, and whether it's drip or whether it is spray, a plant needs the water that it needs regardless how you've given it.
And I agree, invasive species I think are the biggest problem that I see. We've been really fortunate in San Diego to have the multiple habitat planning area implemented region-wide. That leaves us with a landscape that has all of these interior canyons. We all get a lot of view lots, but that we should be sensitive into what we're including in the design and in the installation so that we're not degrading that valuable habitat that we all love.
Okay, so let's switch over to hardscape here. As landscape architects, we're designing a lot of hardscape. And the more we learn about sustainability, the more we're learning that there's some materials that are just not that sustainable. So I ask, what hardscape materials are used commonly that we should be trying to avoid? Keep in mind, not only what it takes to make the material, but how does it affect maintenance and longevity?
This was one I wasn't really sure how to answer. A lot of the hardscape issues that we see are usually associated with irrigation overspray, breaking down the hardscape itself. We don't do much hardscape installation. We do a lot of DG and some interlocking pavers. I guess one thing from the stormwater side of things is we've seen some specs that include the polymer sands, which are good for preventing weeds, but at the same time, they no longer are permeable at that point. So it's just something to think about. If you're speccing one thing to prevent weeds, you also took away the permeability of your paver, if that's what you were going for.
Well, I struggled with this one too. I appreciate all the hardscape material choices that we have today. One material that I don't appreciate is it's a headerboard material, and it's the recycled plastic that they're using for headerboard. And I didn't realize it, but in a 20-foot length, this recycled material can contract and expand up to 2 inches. And it can really create some problems on a large job where you're trying to explain to the owner why this material lifts and moves and curls and grows and shrinks, and again, we only want to install this stuff once. I want to take 2 seconds on DG, on a DG pathway I mentioned earlier. A permeable application, and I think in a lot of applications a great way to build a path. But I think we need to be careful using a DG path in a commercial area where there's a lot of traffic. We installed an extensive pathway system on a project, and before the project was even opened, an executive got out of her car, walked the path, had too much grit on her feet, and was a little concerned with the liability of maybe slipping, and decided to remove it and replace it with concrete. And we did such a good job installing this that it was hard to see that they would remove it and replace it with concrete. But I think that the fact that it was just a property that had so much traffic, it was probably the right thing to do.
I agree with everyone. This was a little bit of a tougher question. But besides asphalt and concrete in general, the way I looked at it was more of from a sustainability impact, is more of a carbon footprint on possibly imported materials. This might be a little bit more for residential or estate residential, but typically this is where you're going to see higher end materials. They're coming in from overseas, and what's the long-term carbon footprint on a travel like that versus sourcing local pavers that are maybe made in San Diego or rock or stone or tile. So.
I would say some of the permeable systems, not all of them. I think some are better than others. I think there was this real rush to make these permeable systems, and a lot of them have long-term maintenance issues that weren't always maybe analyzed so carefully when it seemed like a good idea. I think a lot of them, it was still experimental on trying to get those systems to work. I'm thinking specifically of the Rice Krispie porous concrete, where it starts degrading and falling apart pretty quickly.
John keeps forgetting who he is. Did anybody notice it feels like we're right by the raging waterfall here? It's kind of nice. Okay, so it's becoming more and more common that we're asked to modify existing landscapes to be more water conserving. So what challenges do you face, and how are you solving them?
Client budget's one of the biggest challenges when you look at renovating for achieving water conservation. Sometimes, going in and doing the irrigation fixes are usually the most important into getting any kind of return on investment for the monies you're putting into it. When you start looking at doing all of the turf replacement and all those other type of fixes, if there's no rebate involved, water's so cheap that still, even with prices rising, that it rarely makes pure economic sense. There's an argument to be made for aesthetic improvement and all of that. However, if you just look at the ROI of the renovation, it can be a tough sell when the property manager or owner can look at installing LEDs with a much quicker payback. We still have some of a pushback from some owners on aesthetic perceptions of what the property will look like, and just disagreeing in general that that's the look that they want for their property. That's education though. That's on us to educate them. Um, yeah.
I've always looked at it as, you know, landscaping is an investment. There's a real cost to it, and it's great when you have an opportunity to install a new landscaping, and you're turning. I've always called it you're turning something brown to green. Re-landscaping. Now you've got to again educate your client. There's a cost to it, and you've got to build up that trust that your client and the property owner knows that that it's going to be worth the investment. You know, re-landscaping, retrofits, they are a challenge. They're a challenge to bid. They're a lot harder to perform the work than a new landscape. But again, if you've gained the client's trust and they can see that it'll be a saving in the long run, then it's worth the effort.
Two areas I'd like to talk about for the subject is the first one being smart controllers. I put in quite a few smart controllers. I think they're a great point source solution for saving water. Some of the issues, not issues, but some of the growing pains that I've had with them is that they're just not set it and forget it, and I knew that from the beginning, and it takes, you know, a while to definitely tweak them in before you can walk away from them, but you never really walk away from them. You're still always maintaining, taking a look at that clock and making sure it's doing what it should do, but it's just not the clock. You're looking at the entire landscape to make sure that clock is doing what it's going to do. However, one thing I've discovered is that they're so good that they'll actually show your irrigation inefficiencies in the middle of the summer. So you will find your hot spots. If you didn't know you had them, you'll find them in the summer because you're always kind of on the edge of just giving it just enough water, but not too much. So if you're missing a head in a corner, you're definitely gonna find out. But in general, it's a great way to go. The other one is drip irrigation. I think drip irrigation is another great way to save water in the landscape. As I had mentioned before, though, a plant needs the amount of water a plant needs regardless how you give it to it. And then the one struggles that I had, the continuing struggle that I have with drip irrigation systems is how do I fertilize the landscape? Because if it's a broadcast fertilizer or soil conditioner, I'm only spot treating, so to speak, unless you get the winter rains going. So the solution I found to that is fertigation systems, and that's a great way to fertilize in general in microdoses, and it's a great way to convert traditionally maintained landscape and convert it into an organic garden.
This is a big topic for us designers. So I think a lot of times we have communities, maybe HOAs, who've decided they want this new xerophytic low water landscape, and they hire us to come in and redesign everything, and we think, oh no, here it goes again. They're gonna have us do this design, they're gonna go to install it and realize they have no money to actually build this new design. So they end up building a demonstration garden in the middle of the community that is all like succulents when they have lawn and trees and lush plantings. And then you know, maybe it's natives, and then they start looking scraggly because no one really knows how to maintain them. And it becomes this blight, and then they all decide they hate low water plants and they hate you know, native plants. So we really try and take approach to work with our clients in more of a long-term view, to try and get on quarterly walkthroughs with the maintenance contractor, to try and go through the plant material and get some corrective pruning in there, salvage what we can, and to implement maybe a new understory, and you know, in areas remove lawn where it makes sense, and maybe educate our client on lawn areas don't have to be that lush and green Garden of Eden. Maybe you can back off of the water and they can be kind of a yellow green, you know. and save a lot of water in just reducing the water we're applying to an existing landscape.
We're on the relay team, by the way, for the Olympics, and panelists speaking. Thank you for laughing. Okay, so I have several more questions, but I'm going to ask just this one last question, and then I'm going to open it up to some questions from the audience. And I think this is a little bit more towards the contractors, but perhaps Michelle has something to say. What strategies should be taken to transition from a landscape that was maintained in a traditional manner to a more organic manner? So we're really maintaining sustainably. And I'll throw in this curve to you. If you see that something that landscape architects or designers can do to make that easier, let us know. Now.
Educating your client on the process and expectations is huge. I think if you just pull the plug on all the synthetics that are going in there and go straight to organics, it's going to be a shock all around to the plants, to the people, everyone involved. So I think you really have to go through with your client and educate them on the process. It's going to be a longer term process to get everything up to par, and that might mean rebuilding the soil profile, improving irrigation systems, reviewing the plant palette to see if it's in line with the goals of the landscape switch you're going to do. Soil profile buildup, I think testing the soil fertility of where you're at right now before you do this transition is really important so that you take the correct steps to get your soil profile in line. And then just really retesting the soil after a certain amount of months and seeing if those amendments that you've been putting in there, the compost, the mulches, those are making a difference. And then, yeah, my basic point here is invest in your soil, and it's going to make a huge difference. The other is if you're going from a traditional bald hedges look to naturalistic pruning, some plants have been balled up for so long they're really never, I'm not going to say never, but it's going to take a long time for them to look at all natural or organic looking, so it's just something to consider.
Some clients will fire you if you won't prune their plants into balls and squares. Raj, I agree with you. The client, the property owner has to see the benefit of going to a sustainable landscape. And you know, there's a lot of things you can do. There's a cost to it. Build up that trust, but with all the new irrigation technology out there, you can start with that. There's such wonderful drought-tolerant native plant materials out there that can be incorporated. You know, when you're ready to maintain and water properly. Again, reducing your ground cover and turf areas and using mulch in areas, and then pruning naturally. That saves time. That saves fuel and your trimmer. But a lot of things you can do to go in that direction.
I agree with the gentleman to my left. I think the first thing that you should do is get a soil sample. And it definitely starts there. You don't even have to send it in. You can do it yourself. All you need to do is find out what the pH, NPK are, and start working from there. It's true, you can't go from salty soil, salty water, and salty fertilizer, and then all of a sudden give it a wheatgrass diet and think it's going to like it. It's going to stress out. The plants they're addicted to what they've been fed for so long, so you have to literally wean them off of what they've been doing, and that takes time. So you have to educate your clients that it's not going to happen overnight. I tell my clients it takes 6 months, to a year before they actually start seeing the improvement that they want to see on an organic and holistic approach. The other thing you mentioned as well is just client education. The more you educate them, the more they respect you, the more they trust you, and the more referrals you're going to get as well. And then the other thing too is, and it goes with the time, but it's tolerance during that in-between stage. Everyone's always expecting the garden to look better with the next, maintenance contractor gardener that comes in, and I have to tell them that it might decline a little bit before it gets better. But it's just the client education that really hits home.
I agree, the client education is key. The pruning techniques, I think, are something we really advocate for. And what we see is that instead of pruning the shrubs maybe twice a month, our contractors are pruning them probably once every 2 years. And suddenly the plants are flowering again because the flowering wood is allowed to grow. So, once you can get the clients over that hurdle of having shrubs that are just sticks, for a few months until they leaf out again, they tend to be really happy with the end result.
Okay. We're going to open this up to some questions for a little bit. And Chris Rosink, it was either just reaching for the sky or has a question.
I have a question. We get a lot of
And I'll repeat the question so people can hear it.
we get a lot of questions from landscape architects and people in the industry about the landscape water use and the model landscape ordinance. So a lot of architects now with larger projects have to do a water use calculation for the site. And there's questions about whether that should be somehow left to the maintenance contractor, so there's a continuity between what the intentions of water use were for the site, and then how the landscape maintenance contractor might approach his project based on that information, so that we can maintain the budgets. And the question is how do you get that in there? Do you tape it in the controller enclosure? Is it something that, for liability purposes, the architect even wants to have in the enclosure? How does that work for maintenance and the design to maintenance side?
So I probably remembered a quarter of that question. But essentially the question is, I'm assuming that not everybody heard that. Do I need to repeat it? Okay. So the question is that the landscape architects are required to write to perform a water use calculation based on the proposed landscape plan. And so then how, some landscape architects think that should be left to the maintenance contractor because they're actually the ones that are going to be kind of setting that. But as the landscape architects, we're required by the agencies to do that. But so how do we get it so that our calculations are in front of the contractor? Am I doing right? Okay. And of course, do you put it in the controller? Or how can we as the landscape architects better communicate that information, make sure that you can get it? Did I leave out any part of the question?
I think that's it.
Okay. And not everybody has to answer this question.
Taping it in the controller would definitely work. We would see that. I think the other piece would be if your client isn't the developer situation, he's the client that's going to own the property and maybe manage it. It's really getting the point across that this is a budget, a water budget for your site, and this equals dollars and cents, and you should use this to help manage your landscape moving forward. If you see really high water bills, you can always look back at this and see what your water use was forecasted to be, and then use that as a communication, a talking point with your contractor. So it's really, I think, important for the landscape architect in that point to just really explain what it is that the MAWA calculation is, or the estimated water use is for the site.
Well, I'm winging it here, but I do think it ought to be a collaboration between the architect. The installation contractor has a 60, 90, or 120-day warranty maintenance period, and then the ongoing maintenance contractor will take over from there. And without a doubt, if I do think that whoever, if the architect is required to submit the documentation prior to the completion of the job, or even maybe it's due before at plan check, I don't know, but it's due at plan check. So I would imagine the architect has relationships with contractors where it can be a collaboration.
The only thing that I can really think of is to possibly get it in that maintenance manual that rarely happens, but hopefully will be happening more. I know the last landscape architecture office that I was working at, we're starting to put those together. And instead of asking the client if they wanted it, it was a part of the package that we gave them. And we kept building on it with the plans and the information we were putting in there. So each time that we did it, it was less time consuming to put together. So hopefully we'll see more of those, even though typically construction admin and those types of things do get, cut off of the design fees.
I can only speak to the offices I've worked for, and we always include a schedule with the evapotranspiration rate month by month for each station in our package. So it is both in the landscape plans. If we have the good fortune to have a long vision client that has a maintenance and operations manual, it's always included in that too. We understand when you turn over a project, there's going to be heavier irrigation because we need to establish that plant material. It's going to take more water. But what we find is a lot of times the contractors don't come in and reset the controllers up on a month-by-month basis. That demand changes. Obviously in July, you'd have a lot more demand than in January.
Yes, sir.
Wouldn't it be better if we could get the landscape areas of our projects treated different than the construction areas? All of our projects that I'm familiar with, the entire pad is cleared, compacted, all the good soil is mixed with all the bad soil, and you end up with this project and this land that was never actually intended to grow plants. What needs to be done, from my perspective, of course, for consultants, is when the project is being done, you set out where the parking's going to be, you set out where the building's going to be, and you try to engineer the soil in the planting area so that you actually have soil there. That would be the biggest help to sustainable gardening that I can envision.
Question is how do we, can't we just find a way to preserve the topsoil that typically gets removed during construction, during the grading for the pads, and all the slough around the edges? I'm going to respond to that myself in that I think fairly soon that's going to be a requirement in the plans that we create a document that identifies what area of topsoil is to remain, what areas can the contractor park in, so that we're not compacting the soil, even if it was never intended, or when it was never intended to be graded. Would you guys like to add any more to that?
On some of our projects where we actually had a topsoil layer, because that is difficult in San Diego in an arid climate. A lot of times we don't have a lot of topsoil to work with. But where we have good topsoil, a lot of times we'll do a soil save it in windrows for reuse. That sometimes the contractors aren't very happy with that because they have to set aside some of their staging area. But I think that's our job to show the importance of that. And it has not just the soil; it has all the biological activity. We also have some really
Sustainable gardening on soil that's never prepared for plants.
yeah.
I see almost no project being built in San Diego County where you end up with soil that's actually going to sustain the plant material.
Absolutely. It's a big issue for us.
That's
We
the
have,
biggest issue. You're going to have sustainable gardening. Then you get that accomplished. Then you get the engineers to say, here's the building, here's the parking lot, leave the rest of the soil alone.
Yeah, I think we're fortunate to have companies like Sharon's. Agri-Service has some really great compost mulches and compost additives that helps a lot to regenerate that yellow soil or sterile soil condition too. So we do try and integrate things like that.
Yes, sir.
I have a question for the landscape architects in regards to what Chris Rosemary was saying. If the water use calculations are available as a maintenance contractor, can we come to you and get them from you, purchase them? How do we go about that?
So the question is, if the water use calculations are available, which we're required to do, can the landscape maintenance contractor come to us and get them? And he actually threw in the question, could they pay for them? I would be happy to sell them to you. We could discuss that after this evening. I don't know of a
It's part of the package, so it's usually included in the working drawings for our office.
So let's say we just took over a project that, after a year.
Yeah, it's usually part of the working drawings, especially in the last 4 or 5 years since this has been a requirement. It's usually part of the
So
construction
take them through
package.
the ASBIL process.
You can still purchase them from
Yeah.
Let's not forget.
I got you.
Yes, Ari.
So a colleague of mine, I'm a landscape contractor, and a colleague of mine recently shared an article about some things going on in Colorado where they're banning a lot of herbicides and pesticides and possibly synthetic fertilizers too. And I think it raised some important questions, and I think we're going to be addressing those issues here. So I wanted to know what you guys think the role of legislation might be in educating our clients, in educating ourselves, and kind of moving things in a more sustainable direction. What, if any, role legislation might have?
Okay, thank you, Ari. The question is that in Colorado, they're starting to legislate out synthetic fertilizers and other non-organic maintenance practices. And so he wants to know, how can San Diego start to implement those sorts of...
Well, so what might that look like? In Colorado, the landscape contractors came out against the legislation. And so what I'm interested in is, what are your thoughts about what would be a beneficial legislation where the contractors wouldn't be, hemming and hawing, like, you can't do that. What's a way to find a beneficial legislation?
How do we find a mutually liked and beneficial way to maybe start to require more sustainable maintenance practices?
It's a really difficult question, Ari. I do see that as being a possible path that California could take as well, especially when you look at stormwater and the permitting that's going on in stormwater, and what you're allowed to have run off your site now compared to 10 years ago is pretty different, and I think it's going to get more stringent. I think the way that the water districts have gone about it in California with creating the performance standard of ET, maybe the way that the state could go about it, testing runoff from sites and saying you have to be below this chemical load. And if you can perform within that using synthetics, go ahead. If not, you have to go to organics. I don't know. That might be one way, but it's a good question.
Well, I think we all know change is difficult, and we're going to probably scream and kick. But I hope as an industry, as the landscape industry, green industry, we can stay ahead of that. And figure, I mean, we're already doing that by seeing our industry embrace sustainable practices. I hope we can stay ahead of it. And it's going to take the manufacturers and just the visionaries to figure out what we're going to do to keep our landscapes green and to be able to put the nutrients that these plants need to be healthy.
All I have to say is it's coming, so be prepared.
I have more to say. I think we've been implementing the integrated pest management locally in California for quite a while now. And what that is basically using pesticides as a last resort. I think when you're trying to kill a living creature, it usually takes a pretty toxic concoction to do that. So sometimes that's selecting different plant material, sometimes that's using different natural products to combat that first. When we look at herbicides, to me that's a different ballgame. And that is based on my experience working for the California Department of Fish and Game, or Fish and Wildlife now, as of January 1st. And what's used to kill plants is usually not as toxic. It's usually salt is very toxic to plants. So herbicides in general are pretty safe practice. Around waterways, we go to a surfactant, the thing that makes the herbicide stick to the leaves that is non-ionic. So it doesn't stick to like the gills of little fish in there. But so I think it's more that continuing education that all of us at this table need to be incorporating into our day-to-day world and being sensitive to this movement that our earth is worth protecting.
If I could add to that, one of the reasons that we did the ASLA Stewardship Sustainable Design Charrette was to find a way that we could talk to our clients about doing the right thing by showing them how it's profitable to them without ever bringing up the topic of sustainability. Because very often when we talk to our clients or the developers about sustainability, many of them just shut down. So if we can talk about how we can save them money, either in the short run or the long run, and then maybe the next day say, oh, by the way, you're now living green, that's a plus. So I think that in this sustainable maintenance effort, we need to do more than just sell the idea of it's the right thing for the environment. I think we need to keep looking for ways to show, or maybe it's not there yet. We need to make it affordable. And I think this type of event is one way to educate all of us so that we can talk to our clients better. So, did you have a question?
I'd like to introduce myself to the group and explain the project. It's pretty much along the same line.
Okay, is it a, but it's not a question. You're just want to.
I wanted to present who the group collaborative effort to design sustainable landscape design in the public area.
Okay, let me just hold on one minute. I want to get in it. Are there any other questions? Jim. Sorry, Naveed.
It's very interesting walking around tonight that there's a lot of urban agriculture going on here where they're bringing in chickens, they're bringing in trees, fruit-bearing trees, vines, vegetables, the whole deal. What type of maintenance issues do you see, or any other type of issues, when this hits the mainstream and you start seeing in parkways, homeowners associated with that kind of stuff?
So his question is walking around and seeing all these gardens and seeing the type of landscapes, and Jim, I have to admit, I didn't hear the entire part, but seeing all these different types of landscapes, and this becomes more the desirable concept, and we start to see it going into... It's the edibles? Okay, I didn't hear that part, sorry. So as we start to see more edibles in edible plants in the landscape, in the public spaces, what are the effects of that?
I grew up in Davis, California, and Village Homes is one of the oldest kind of integrated communities with fruit trees everywhere. And that was a very community-involved system where the community really took the role of participating in it. They had landscape maintenance around, but the community took the role of kind of taking pride in the farm and production there, and it worked well. I mean, it's still working. I think in the commercial sense, you'd really have to take ownership of keeping the trees pruned correctly, collecting fruit if it's not being used for edible purposes, or integrating the cafeterias on these campuses into the process to make sure that the food isn't just the fruit's not going from the tree into green waste. Because that's what we see a lot in these parkways, is no one knows that they're allowed to eat the fruit, so it falls off and it rots and it becomes a pest issue. So I think it's really got to be a community effort, even if it's on a private campus, of really involving everyone to make sure it just doesn't go to waste.
What I've seen on a number of projects is the hotels or restaurants that want to plant an herb garden, but they have somebody out there every day actively tending that, and they're utilizing the herbs on a daily basis, and I think it's great.
As far as aesthetic, I think that edibles can completely enhance a landscape, whether they're in shrub format or tree formats. Now, if we're concerned about the aesthetics of urban farming in residential areas and growing corn in the parkways, I guess that's a whole nother thing. But I too walked around real quick and noticed the same concept kind of going around, and that is what's going on. Most people are getting more interested in composting. They're getting more interested in planter boxes and growing vegetables and going to the store on the weekend and buying a fruit tree. I just think that's the way to go. If you're going to water it, let it yield something for you.
And I too see that trend both in the design community and then with my students are really bringing that interest to the class. Many of them are here tonight. I know that there's been some maintenance companies that have evolved to specifically maintain these edible areas, and I think that's a great thing. I also think when we look at spending our water dollars wisely, if we know we're going to spend a lot of water units on a particular plant, why not have it produce something that is of value that you can eat and share with the neighbors?
I'll come to you if there aren't any other questions.
And, yeah, oh, sorry, Naveed, yes.
Yeah, my question's relating to irrigation. So my background is as a landscape architect and contractor. And we're installing a lot of 12-inch pop-up with the rotating heads. We do a lot of commercial irrigation design too, where we're doing the drip inline emitters. But I'm always concerned to take like a 10-foot, 20-foot wide area and start throwing lines 18 inches on center. So I'm wondering on the maintenance side, do you have any issues with drip? If you had the choice for a 10 to 20 foot area distance for like a row, would you choose spray over drip?
Well, I know what the answer would have been 10 years ago. But the question is that as a landscape architect and a contractor, as he is, he uses the pop-up heads on risers, as well as drip, and he's concerned about what are the maintenance issues when you're using drip in a very large area. Is that the question, right? So, what are your thoughts?
Mentioned it earlier with fertilizing your plants. If you don't have fertigation and you're just top dressing fertilizer, with that big expanse of drip, it becomes difficult to get the nutrients to your plants. We're doing a lot of drip as well, the inline drip on larger planters, and some of the complaints I've gotten from the crews is that if you mulch over it, it's really difficult to know that you have an issue until it's somewhat too late. The plant's really stressing out, and you don't know why until you figure it out. It's a learning process basically, but it's much easier to run your valve and see that one of the nozzles is broken or clogged or cockeyed or something like that than it is with subsurface drip that it just, you can't see. So I guess that's one of the issues there, but it seems to work well with the plants where we've been installing it.
Well, I think drip is here to stay. As a contractor, I would rather install a conventional system with PVC piping and sprinkler risers and sprinkler heads. It is easier to install. You can recognize problems quicker, and well,
I don't have a preference in between the two. Obviously, if you can see it and it's working, you can